Yo, listen up. Here's the story about a little guy that lives in a blue world. And all day and all night, and everything he just sees is blue, inside and outside. If you haven't guessed by now, between the intro, the thumbnail, and the title of the video, we're doing blue armor. But not just any blue armor, this is somewhat of a comic or an animated approach to non-metallic metal. Alright, you know the drill. Black primer, white zenithal. The zenithal isn't for me or for the painting, it's so you can see it on camera. We're going to shoot some blue on it, but you don't need an airbrush, just use a normal brush. Starting off with Vallejo's blue, we're going to pick out probably 2/3 of each cylinder shape. And you want to start thick. Even though the highlights will come into a very fine point, you want to give yourself room to move. You don't want to squish everything in too early. Space Marines are basically cylindrical in shape. Well, all the limbs are at least. So we're going to start to push everything towards the top of those cylinder shapes, or the sides, whatever the high part for you is. To keep things simple, we're going to treat the top panel as a cylinder as well. So we're going to move slightly off-centered and do the same thing. Taking our original blue, we're going to mix 50-50 with medium blue. Now 50-50 doesn't mean equal parts here, it means the color in between the two colors that we're mixing together. We're going to use this same color to start highlighting and picking out some of the details that we want a little bit more focus to. We want to start directing the eyes to certain edges and ledges. We're still using pretty wide brush strokes on this because we don't want to back ourselves into a corner just yet and run out of room for our higher highlights. Now we're going to jump straight into that medium blue straight from the bottle. Now this is a pretty stark, pretty bold line, but this is where we really start to draw the attention and give the effect of a glisten or a gleam. The reason I refer to this as a comic book style or an animated style of non-metallic metal is because we're essentially creating cell lines. We're painting in our own lines here. If you wanted to glaze the darker color from the step before, you can definitely smooth out all of these blends and make it silky smooth. Even though we haven't mentioned it yet, for the shoulder pauldrons, I've basically just been drawing little circles with each step. Now this is because it's a curved surface, so the light's going to start to hit it and kind of spread out more in a ball shape. We're also going to pick out the highest highlights with this color, since it is a pretty stark jump. And this is what's going to really start to sell that metallic feel. For some of the smaller details, trinkets and corners, we're just going to hit a slight dot or even a scratch just to give it that feel of there is a hard light bouncing from this surface. And for this power fist, because it's quite a large open space, I'm going to start halfway down and just draw that single line before we start sketching in a little bit more. This is going to feel like it's pushing the light towards the end of the fist. Now with our Andrea Blue, we're going to push the highest highlights. Now I do end up mixing a little bit of white in with this as well for the very final highlight, just to really give a sharpness to the edges and corners. Since we've been focusing a lot on the highlights, we also want to do something with the shadows. So all those big panels and all those hard to reach places where the light wouldn't be hitting so intently,
we're going to glaze a little bit of violet purple from Vallejo. This is just going to make our shadows feel a little bit more interesting. To get separation of detail, we're going to go in with a true black and basically paint in between all the panels. Now, this panel lining is really going to start to pull apart all the details and make them look like single pieces. While we've got the black out, we're going to go ahead and do all the little bits of armor joins in between and anything that's going to be metallic. Now, for the actual non-metallic metal, we're going to start off here with a little bit of Rhinox Hide. This is going to be our deepest, darkest color, and that's probably the one that we work off the most. With a 50-50 mix of Rhinox Hide and Mournfang Brown, we're going to pick out probably about 3/4, leaving the deeper recesses of that pure Rhinox Hide behind. What really sells non-metallic metal is the dynamics between the darkest dark and your highlights. We're going to add Scrofulous Brown into that same mix and pick out even less of the detailing. Now, I'm using a little bit of an overbrush technique, so basically I'm just dragging the brush across the details and it's only picking up the raised surfaces. Because Scrofulous Brown by itself is but ugly, I've mixed a little bit of Skeleton Horde in with it to use as our highest highlight. Now, this is going to be the super sharp gleam. This is where our effect's coming from. I like my gold a little bit darker, but if you want to brighten it up, you can glaze over this with a little bit of yellow. Now, for all the bone detailing, we're going to use the same ideas, except we're going to use 3 different colors, and they're not that big of a jump. With this one, we don't want that jump in dynamic, so I'm starting off with Skeleton Legion by 2 thin coats, jumping into Vampire Fang, and then Ivory Tusk for our highest highlight. If you've been wondering where we find all these female heads from, Artel W have been kind enough to send a little shipment out with some of their sculpts, and they are absolutely fantastic. If you made it this far through the video, I just want to say thank you. And I also want to say a massive thank you to InGames for sponsoring this week's video. You'll find all the links in the description. And while we're here giving thanks and giving pleas and graces, I also want to thank the awesome people on our Patreon, the Prismatic Heretics. You guys are what keep this channel running. See you next time.